Two local fishermen found themselves floating across the ocean, bodies fatigued and minds numb from the danger they had faced and were still exposed to. They both knew dying was not an option, but their situation grew more dire as the moments went by. What would they do to survive? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. When this local Salvadoran fisherman was rescued, his first words to the world was, "Is a skilled fisherman and sailman." With over 20 years of experience under his belt, Jose was considered one of the more skilled fishermen in his small town located in El Salvador. At the young age of 35, Jose came up with an idea that would change his life forever in the most devastating way: Jose Salvador Alvarenga. But what was this plan? Jose was 35 years old when he came up with what he believed to be an ingenious and lucrative idea that was sure to help him and his family reach self-sufficiency. He had been fishing for over 20 years and believed it would be an easy enough plan to accomplish. Jose's plan was to create a regular fishing expedition that would last a few days, but would enable him and his crew to generate enough fish to make a week's worth of income. It was ingenious, but also bold. Jose would have to go into the ocean with someone he could trust, and he began to plan ahead for the trip. Jose had contacted an old fisherman friend, Ray Perez, who agreed that with their combined skill, both he and Jose would likely make the trip successfully. They knew that their goal was ambitious, but trusted in their skill to accomplish it. However, after constructing the boat they would need, an unexpected hiccup arose. A few days before they were set to sail, Perez informed Jose that he was no longer available for the trip. This was a devastating blow to their plans, and a hurdle Jose was determined to overcome. After several attempts to convince Perez to change his mind, Jose turned to finding someone else for the trip. Jose tried asking others to join his trip, but no one would agree. They all understood the risk and were unwilling to take on that level of danger. It was a day left till the planned expedition. Jose was growing worried, and finally he decided to visit the neighboring town. There he met Ezequiel Cordoba, a 23-year-old soccer fanatic with no fishing experience but a zealous attitude. Cordoba was hesitant, but finally agreed on one condition: a $50 pay upfront. It was an expensive price, but Jose was desperate for help. With their agreement in place, the two planned their expedition. It would be a 32-hour expedition, lasting all night and a day. With their catch, they were certain they would return the evening of the next day. But what they would face would be unspeakable. Jose and Cordoba packed up lunch and dinner for their trip. They had fishing nets and heavy equipment for the shark they intended to catch the next morning, but they would never make it far enough to catch the shark. An hour into their sailing, they discovered several of their equipment was flawed or missing batteries. What was worse, there were unpredicted heavy waves. The waves had capsized their boat, and much of the fish they had caught was now. But even worse, their tracking and signal equipment was damaged. Jose and Cordoba soon realized that they were lost at sea, with no way or hope of getting back on their own. But even more alarming was a present issue they had not noticed. They had not just lost their catch, but also the food they had packed for the expedition. This realization set in after a full day of being at sea. They had hoped to ration the food while they waited for help, but at the time of their meal, they noticed the packets were gone. Jose came up with an ingenious idea for food, but would it work? Since they no longer had nets to catch fish, Jose searched carefully to ensure there were no roaming sharks, and dipped his hand into the water to catch singular fish that rose above the surface. Although it worked the first few days, by the second week, the fish had soon learned and no longer came up by the boat. But that was the least of their problem. Although they were hungry, Jose and Cordoba had more problems on their hands. The water continued to move them towards the ocean and farther away from land, and the farther away they got, the harsher the weather became. They were dehydrated, starved, and farther from their home as every minute went by and the pain began to set in. As the months went by, Jose and Cordoba found themselves growing closer. They shared their hopes, dreams, and fears with one another. Encouraging each other to live on and fight, they refused to believe they would not make it, and made a promise to each other. They would apologize to their mothers if they made it out alive, and if either of them did not make it back, the other would pass on the message in their stead. "I'm dying. It's time for me to say goodbye." A few months after they made their promise, Jose woke up to find his friend muttering something. Soon, Jose realized his friend was going into shock. He grabbed him and began to beg him not to give up. However, the only words that would come out of Cordoba's mouth were... For days after Cordoba's death, Jose was in a state of delusion, believing his friend to still be alive. He would often speak to him and respond in his place. It was the only way Jose knew to keep his resolve. Finally, 6 days after Cordoba's death, Jose came out of his stupor, his mind far more determined than he had ever been. With newfound determination, Jose set out to bury his friend. Taking off Cordoba's clothes, he washed the body carefully, before saying a momentary prayer and dropping his friend into the ocean, vowing that he would live on for the both of them. Taking Cordoba's clothes, Jose put them on and began to conceive of a plan to get rescued, and soon it would be a conceivable dream. A few months later, Jose was shocked to find himself a few miles from water. Turning the boat, he sailed towards the island, but he was shocked to discover that he was on the other side of the continent. Jose found himself on the land a few days later, spotting a few people before he finally passed out. Jose was found and sheltered by a family until he finally woke up from his temporary coma. The people had lots of questions, but Jose was cautious and fearful from his months of devastation. Soon he was taken to the hospital for further review. When asked where and when he was coming from, his response would shock both the staff and his saviors. Soon, people were walking by the man who, by their calculator, had been lost at sea for over a year. Jose was resistant to the media and refused to speak with them. Soon, he heard that they doubted his story. This upset him as he felt it was an insult to the memory of his friend, who had not made it back alive. His first visit with the press was clear. His first words were, Jose's news finally reached his little town where several rescue teams had gone searching for both him and Cordoba before giving up a few months later, believing them both to be dead. His family was ecstatic to see him after so much time and prayer, especially his mother, who had never given up on him. As soon as Jose recovered enough for travel, he knew what he had to do. Sailing to the old town where he had met his friend for the first time, he went to visit Cordoba's mother. He relayed his friend's message as he had promised, his eyes soaked in tears as he begged her for forgiveness. Cordoba's mother was quick to forgive him, explaining she didn't blame him and was glad to hear her son's last words. Jose continues to inspire many to never give up. You can read about his experience in his book, 438 Days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea. Although some of Cordoba's family still accuses him of killing Cordoba, Jose continues to state his innocence. His story is both a painful reminder of the fragility of life and an inspiring look at the power of will and determination.